People get incarcerated all the time, but usually they're adults. It's not so shocking to hear about it then, because from our point of view, they got through the fun stages of their lives. But what about the kids who get incarcerated? You don't hear about what happens to them half as often, and we're left wondering if they managed to escape the system and how they've turned out. We put together a list of 10 young people who entered the system at a young age and spent their entire youth there. There isn't much to do inside, and we're pretty sure there isn't much internet access either. So before we start, make the most of your situation and click subscribe so you don't miss out on our other videos. Evan Miller. At only 14 years old, Evan Miller was tried as an adult and given life without parole. Now, you might think this is unfair considering his age, but what the 14-year-old did to receive this punishment might make you reconsider slightly. It's not unusual for kids to enjoy playing with fire, but Evan took it one step further and set a house alight. Unfortunately, there was someone inside who never got to see the outside world again. The worst part? Evan knew the guy was inside in the first place and set the mobile home alight regardless. When a lot of people realize they're going to spend the rest of their lives behind bars, they try and reform. Some take up a hobby, some learn to read, and others might start working out more frequently. But not Evan. He's shown no remorse for his crime, which hasn't helped his case when it comes to letting him out any earlier. Unlike many of the people who've made it to the list, Evan had a supportive family, although he was still brought up in foster care. His mother tearfully waved him off as he was taken away to spend his life behind bars, and we're not surprised, because no parent wants to watch their child grow up surrounded by thugs. Donald Logan. The case of 16-year-old Donald Logan is a strange one, because nobody has ever been sure as to whether he committed the crime or not. Sure, he acted as a lookout at the scene of the crime, but allegedly didn't actually partake in the action himself. Regardless, he was tried twice and convicted with life behind bars. Young Donald had been wandering the streets with a few older boys when the incident happened. A few weeks earlier, a guy in Donald's group had wronged the local paperboy, and they wanted to prevent him from giving evidence. Donald pointed the guy out in the street, and some of the others in the group took charge and threatened the paperboy. It all went wrong, and Donald was found guilty for playing a role in ending the paperboy's life. So Donald was sent inside and grew up there. He managed to teach himself to read and write, and learned about religion. The psychologist who examined him said that although Donald was 17 by this point, he had the mental capacity of a 12-year-old. This is what makes the case even sadder. He was finally released in 2010 after 37 years locked up behind bars. Sarah Cruzon. The only other female to take a place on our list, Sarah Cruzon was forced into a life of crime at only 11 years old and only escaped when she decided to get her own back. She was 16 when she was incarcerated, and although it might have been a welcome break from her standard lifestyle, it still meant that Sarah grew up surrounded by the bottom layer of society. Rather than spending her young years bonding with friends or getting an education, Sarah spent them committing crimes and then inside the prison system. It's definitely not a life we'd wish upon anybody. Sarah, in one sense, was lucky, because her sentence was reduced after it caught attention from the state. At first, after ending another man's life, she was given life inside with no chance of parole. After lawyers and activists got involved, her sentence was reduced to 25 years and then down to a further 15. By the time this had been agreed, though, she was already free. Her case was a very sad one, and we're happy she's outside now. But we can't help but remember the fact that she grew up alone and without any family support in prison. Terrence Graham. He was already being watched by the police for committing a series of other crimes when 16-year-old Terrence Graham took his life of crime just one step too far. He took part in a series of robberies, and although people got hurt, nobody was seriously injured. You'd have thought that this would work in Terrence's favor, but he was still given a life sentence for his crime. This was rare, and the 16-year-old is the second person ever to be given a life sentence for committing a serious crime. But with nobody passing away as a result, many human rights activists have argued his case and said it's unethical and incredibly cruel to expect a 16-year-old to spend his life inside from such a young age. Now, we've already learned about a few young people who spent their early years inside the system, but it doesn't get any easier hearing it again. Luckily, although he grew up inside, Terrence won't have to spend his life there. A landmark ruling changed his sentence from life to 25 years, which means he should hopefully see the outside world at some point. It's not 100% guaranteed, but it's looking like Terrence will be free from the system in 2029, when he'll be 42 years old. Matthew Bentley. At only 5 feet and 4 inches tall, 14-year-old Matthew Bentley might not have looked half as dangerous as he actually was. His life of crime started fairly innocently. He wanted to steal a car. Like many young boys, he loved cars and wanted to try out driving for the first time. He was also looking for cash, and so it was his greed which led him to spending his life in jail. The house that Matthew decided to break into was owned by a guy who loved guns. This wasn't what Matthew was expecting, but he went with it. He picked a few up and also grabbed a can of Coke on the side. It was at this moment when a woman walked into the room and saw Matthew. In panic, he pulled the trigger and left her lying on the floor. Later, she passed away. Matthew has never disputed what he did, but at such a young age, it wasn't surprising to hear he showed a bit of emotion. Apparently, he apologized to the woman before he left and shed a few tears. We reckon he shed at least a few more, as he's grown up in prison over the years. Jennifer Pruitt. We've seen in the past that law seems to relax a bit when it comes to incarcerating girls, but Jennifer Pruitt clearly committed a crime so bad that the judge thought she deserved to spend her teenage years behind cell doors. At the age of 16, she'd spent a pretty significant role in ending an elderly man's life. However, as brutal as this sounds, Jennifer wasn't entirely to blame. She'd grown up in an unstable family and ran away from home when she was younger. At 16, she ended up living with a neighbor who got a kick out of stealing from people. Desperate for some accommodation stability, Jennifer joined in. Unfortunately, the neighbor she was with decided to take things one step too far. Jennifer reported the crime, but was later tried and found guilty for her role in the man's passing. She was put away without the chance of parole and has been there for years now. Unlike most teenage girls, she never got the chance to try out new makeup techniques or flirt with boys because she was stuck inside. However, a Supreme Court ruling that said it was unconstitutional for juveniles to be sentenced for crimes means that Jennifer might one day be released. Barney Lee. He had a huge interest in planes, which we guess is pretty helpful for 14-year-old Barney Lee because he could still look at them from prison. After all, they could limit his actions, but they couldn't stop him from staring at the sky. When he wasn't fixated with airplanes, Barney spent his time reading, playing with a model ship, or hanging out with friends. Not typically the makeup for a child who did what Barney did at such a young age. So how did young Barney end up growing up on the inside? Well, it turns out he wasn't a fan of chores or being told off for not doing them. A few months earlier, he'd been staying with his uncle on a farm. Instead of doing the chores his uncle had requested, Barney had sat around playing ball instead. When his uncle told him off, he reacted badly. So badly, in fact, that the police got involved. His uncle didn't live much longer, and Barney ended up being carted off to the local prison. As a result, he was given a life sentence and was officially the youngest person in his area to be given such a punishment. Now, he's spending his time at San Quentin, which is his new home for the foreseeable future. John Pace. So, we accepted that some kids grow up to commit crimes. But for others, the space between black and white is more than slightly blurred. Some young teenagers might go out one night intending to hurt someone, but others might just stumble into trouble. This is what happened to 14-year-old John Pace. He'd spent a casual night hanging out with friends and chilling before wandering home. Admittedly, he'd been drinking, and we all know this is illegal for a kid so young, but we also know he's not the first to do so. However, alcohol might have slightly clouded his judgment here. As he was walking back, John noticed a guy walking towards him. He didn't think for more than a few seconds when he decided to approach the guy and threatened him. He didn't have much cash on him, which angered John, who threw a punch. Soon, the police turned up and John was taken away. However, it didn't end here. The guy that John had punched passed away soon after that night, as a result of falling badly. John pleaded guilty, knowing that he would get a punishment, but didn't anticipate it being so heavy. This 14-year-old was taken out of school and placed in juvenile delinquency and was forced to spend the rest of his teenage years and many more after all in his new bedroom. Kevin Boyd. Whenever kids do something bad, the parents are often blamed. We taught and spend hours wondering what happened when they were younger. Were they brought up wrong, or was it innate? But this is not something we've spent much time considering for lifer Kevin Boyd, who accompanied his mother to commit a crime which left them both inside prison rules. The kid was only 16 at the time, and grew up without experiencing the outside world as a result. Rather than attending college, getting a girlfriend, or playing sports with his friends, he was confined to brick walls, an orange jumpsuit, and the company of some very strange characters. Even before he was incarcerated, Kevin had led a pretty sad life. He previously attended 10 different schools before dropping out at the age of 15. He received psychiatric help for a variety of mental health problems, most of which probably weren't helped by an unstable family life. He says that since he's been in prison, he's had a lot of time to think about his actions. He's currently writing an account of his childhood and hopes it will help him deal with his history. Every day he thinks about his father, and growing up inside four walls probably hasn't helped to serve as a distraction from his crime. Joe Ligon. This boy from Pennsylvania was only 15 when he committed himself to a life on the inside. A casual night out with friends ended up being spent inside the local police cells, but Joe Ligon probably didn't intend on spending the rest of his life inside four walls. In fact, Joe is Pennsylvania's longest-serving lifer and has currently spent more than 60 years staring out the window waiting for release. His main crime, which resulted in the loss of life for 2 men, saw him incarcerated at the age of 16, and he stayed there ever since. At such a young age, Joe only got the opportunity to learn how to be a man from those he caught chatting on the inside. Rather than having family support, he was forced to mature far faster than kids living normal lives. However, although Joe has been inside since he was a kid, he declined the opportunity to face retrial and immediately go on parole. When he went in, he obviously didn't know if he would come out, but he said that by now, he wouldn't want to get his hopes up. We can understand that because 60 years is an unimaginably long period of time, and if someone offered us the chance of release but didn't confirm it, we wouldn't want to get excited for nothing. So now you've learned all about some of the kids inside the system. We bet this is going to make you think twice before doing anything outside of the law. It looks like a pretty scary place, especially with the likes of this guy. We hope you enjoyed this video today. Thanks!